Top of the morning to you. I hope you're all fine and dandy and staying ahead of the game. Remember, it is a game, snakes and ladders, and each one of us must play our part. Welcome, and thank you for joining me. I would ask you to like and subscribe and share and all the usual palaver. It would be good for this information to get further out there. This research, which I have been doing for many years on Facebook, most people are familiar with my research on Facebook, and it's only recently I've started recording and uploading the information that I have been gathering over the years. And this recording is going to look at a number of things. I started a video which was called Christianity, Judaism, Islam and the 7 Perpetual Lights of Heaven, I think it was. And it seems that most people think it's the beginning of a series, so it will be a beginning of a series, because there's a lot of deep teaching in this idea of the great falling away. There are many people out there, many good-hearted people who are Christians and Jews and Messianic Jews, and belong to other religions, and not just Christianity and Judaism, but there are a good many good people out there who think the world is falling away from the faith, and they use verses such as the great falling away that Paul talks about to justify attacking people or having a go at people, condemning people for falling away from the religious doctrines or the beliefs or the practices that have been shown to us, or we have been indoctrinated with. Because really the religions are all controlled, and the method of interpreting the scriptures is very far from their original intentions and what the messages are actually saying. And yes, I'm going to begin a series, and this is another part which is connected to the great falling away and the North Celestial Pole. So this will help anyone that's already looked at the 7 Judaism, Christianity and the 7 Perpetual Lights of Heaven. This should help, but it should also add to in another light. Because as most people know, I have been mapping the heavens and the standing stones over the British Isles, and I've been looking at names of places, and I've been coming across authors such as Barry Dunsmore, Andis Collins, Andrew Collins, Gary Belcliffe and Caroline Hoare, and Combs Beaumont, and many other books, Michael Zarian, the Irish Wisdom preserved in the Bible books, and I've been looking into much of the Celtic and Gaulish and Gael or Gaelic traditions, including the Welsh, including the Irish, including the Northern Irish, who were the Scots. And I've came to a conclusion that, you know, over these years, as many know, that what we see over these lands of Britain, the British Isles, are actually the original biblical stories. And what we see is actually manifest from the heavens, from the North Celestial Pole, which is the Tree of Life. And it's manifest 3 times. And a constellation known as the Argos Navi, or the Argos Navi, is the most prominent constellation up there. Surprisingly, astronomers under the royal instruction broke this asterism up. It once was called the Argos Navi, but it's now been broken into 3 parts, which of course these 3 parts represent the citizenship, because the Argus Navi is the story of Jason and the Argonauts in the heavens, and in the middle of the heavens, or between the three heavens, which is what I'm going to talk about today, the ancient primordial world, the upper world and the underworld. Between the three travelled this ship known as the Argus Navi. I'm not actually going to speak about the Argus Navi today, but what I'm actually going to speak about is this falling away from the upper realm. And I'm going to discuss and have a look at the Enumah Elish, and I'm going to read a number of verses from the Bible, and especially Paul's words in 2 Corinthians 2 Corinthians chapter 12, where he talks about the third heaven. He knew a man who had ascended into the third heaven, and most Christians, most Bible scholars don't even look at this verse, and yet even a cursory read of it, you can see there's something very strange about it. So we're going to look at that today. And we're going to look at the creation stories, and a summary of the creation stories, and from what we look at, we'll piece together what this, or we'll be able to introduce another part of this great falling away. What were we falling away from? What were the New Testament apostles, those who wrote the New Testament letters? They weren't Jews. They were teaching the esoteric. They were teaching things of the heavens and the inner workings of the body. And so we're going to look at that today, and in particular the creation story of the Enumah Elish.
I knew a man in Christ above 14 years ago, whether in the body I cannot tell, or whether out of the body I cannot tell, God knoweth. Such an one caught up to the third heaven. And I knew such a man, whether in the body or out of the body I cannot tell, God knoweth, how that he was caught up into paradise, and heard unspeakable words, which it is not lawful for a man to utter.
So before we can answer this riddle of the three heavens, exactly what is the three heavens, we need to look at the person or the being who has mentioned the three heavens. And of course it's the Apostle Paul in this case, in the book of Corinthians, or the letter of 2 Corinthians. And so we need to take a little look at this character that we all have come to know as Paul the Apostle. Now, if you're brought up within religious circles, or have been within the religious circles, Christianity or Judaism, there will be a lot to be said within these groups regarding Paul. Some people believe he taught against Jesus and taught different teachings, and was opposed to some of the things that the early disciples spoke of and taught. Others say he was 100% on board with the rest of the disciples, and the minor disputes that we read about are just conflicts of characters and different people. But he's a very interesting man because there's a lot written about him, and he gives us many books. So let's begin with the secular sort of history. What are the secular books and places like Wikipedia and such, what have they got to say about Paul? And then we'll have a look at what is true regarding Paul, or what can be found to be true within the research that I and others have partaken in. So Paul, also named Saul of Tarsus. Now this name is very important, Saul or Shaul, Saul of Tarsus. commonly known, the name Tarsus being very important, we'll go back to that later. Saul, commonly known as the Paul, or Paul the Apostle, and St. Paul. He spread the teaching of Jesus in the 1st century. For his contributions towards the New Testament, he is generally regarded as one of the most important figures in the apostolic age. He also founded several Christian communities in Asia Minor and in Europe, and from the mid-40s to the mid-50s AD. The main source of information on Paul's life and works is in the Acts of the Apostles, and anybody who's familiar with the literature of the New Testament will be familiar with the Book of Acts. Approximately half of its contents documents are his travels, preaching and miracles. This is very important. Half of its contents documents are his travels, and this will be important as we go into this teaching later on. Where was he travelling to? Where was he travelling to, and where were these places that he spoke about as he preached in these places? Paul was not one of the 12 apostles and did not know Jesus during his lifetime. According to the Book of Acts, that's also very important. We know that Paul never went to Jerusalem as often as the apostles and the other disciples had wished he had, and that is a grievance they have against him, that he didn't travel to Jerusalem as often as he should to the temple. So some of the other apostles and disciples seem to have that sort of gripe against them, and there is a reason why, because there's a distance, and back then it was quite difficult to travel such a distance. In this study we're actually looking at what is the three heavens and the relation of the distance that where Paul was and the distance to where Jerusalem was. These are the 1, 2 and the 3 heavens, and it wasn't necessarily easy to travel between one and the other, and this is what we're going to look at today. So we'll continue. So Paul was a Pharisee and participated in the persecution of the early disciples of Jesus. Sometime after having approved of the execution of Stephen, Paul was travelling on the road to Damascus, and we'll look at where Damascus is, so that he might find any Christians there to bring them bound to Jerusalem. At midnight, a light brighter than the sun shone around both him and those with him, causing all to fall to the ground, with the risen Christ verbally addressing Paul regarding his persecution in a vision. Having been made blind along with being commanded to enter the city, his sight was restored 3 days later by Ananias of Damascus. And again, we'll look at where Damascus is. After these events, Paul was baptized, beginning immediately to proclaim that Jesus of Nazareth was indeed the Jewish Messiah and the Son of God. He made 3 missionary journeys to spread the Christian message to non-Jewish communities in Asia Minor, the Greek provinces of Achaia, Macedonia and Cyprus, as well as Judea and Syria, as narrated in the Book of Acts. And we'll look at these places as well. If you've been following my research, they'll know that Achaia, ancient Achaia or Arcadia, ancient Macedonia, ancient Cyprus, Judea and Syria are not in Asia Minor or the Near East as we believe them to be today. Anyway, continuing on. 14 of the 27 books in the New Testament have traditionally been attributed to Paul. Sorry about that, put my teeth in. 7 of the Pauline epistles are undisputed by scholars as being authentic, and varying degrees of argument about the remainder. Pauline authorship of the epistle to the Hebrews is not asserted in the epistle itself, and was already doubted in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. It was almost unquestionably accepted from the 5th to the 16th centuries that Paul was the author of Hebrews. And this is important too, because he is the Pharisee. But that view is now almost universally rejected by scholars. The other 6 are believed by some scholars to have come from followers or writing in his name, using materials from Paul's surviving letters. So I will skip forward. Paul's Jewish name means Shaul. So Shaul. Perhaps after the biblical king. This is very important. Saul, the first king of Israel, and Paul, a member of the tribe of Benjamin. The Latin name Paulus, meaning small, was not a result of his conversion, as is commonly believed, but a second name for use in communicating in the Greco-Roman audience. According to the Act of Apostle, he was a Roman citizen. So he was granted Roman citizenship, and there's a reason why for that. As such, he bore the Latin name Paulus, which translates in the biblical Greek as Paulos. It was typical for Jews of that time to have 2 names, as it still is, one Hebrew and the other Latin or Greek. And usually most Jews within synagogues will have a Hebrew name, Aramaic or Yiddish name, and they'll have a worldly name, a secular name in English or whatever community of language that they happen to be living in. So that hasn't changed. Jesus called him Saul, Saul, or Shaul, Shaul in the Hebrew tongue in the Acts of the Apostles. When he had the vision which led him to the conversion on the road to Damascus, again circle that word Damascus, we're going to look at Damascus. Where is Damascus? Later in a vision, Ananias of Damascus, the Lord referred to him as Saul of Tarsus. Now Tarsus is very important. Why does it mention over and over again Tarsus? And these places still exist today. Names have been changed, but they still exist. When Ananias came to restore his sight, he called him Brother Saul, or Brother Saul. In Acts 13, Saul is called Paul for the first time on the island of Cyprus, much later than the time of his conversion. The author of Luke, Acts, indicates that the names were interchangeable. Saul, who is also called Paul, he refers to him as Paul through the remainder of Acts. This was apparently Paul's preference, since he is called Paul in other Bible books, where he is mentioned, including those that he authored, adopting his Roman name with the typical of Paul's missionary style. So, Corinthians, he said in Corinthians that he knew a man in Christ who was caught up into the third heaven. And so this is why we're investigating the being we understand as Shaul of Tarsus. And this is the secular history. This is what the religious organisations and of course the controlled corporate body which is running Wikipedia want you to know about Saul or Shaul or Paul. But there are other alternatives, not only to who Paul was, but to these communities known as Asia Minor and Europe. Who were these communities? And today we're going to take a look at Combs Beaumont's book. So we're going to flick onto some of the key words in the Combs Beaumont book that shows, one, where Tarsus is, where Paul was from, and it'll take us on a journey. So let's join me. Let's go.